This conference will now be recorded.
Hello everyone, I'm Lauren Satterwhite with the NC Medicaid EHR Incentive Program. In program year 2020, all EPs will once again be attesting to Stage 3 Meaningful Use, or MU, and in this webinar, I'm going to cover some of the Stage 3 MU basics and what it means to be a meaningful user. In program year 2020, all EPs will be attesting, like I said, to Stage 3 MU, and they'll be doing so using a 2015 edition of Certified EHR Technology, aka CERT. You'll want to check ONC's Certified Health IT Product List website or the chapel if you're unsure if you have a 2015 edition of CERT. All EPs need to demonstrate MU of their CERT for a consecutive 90-day period in calendar year 2020. So that means sometime between January 1st, 2020 and December 31st, 2020, the EP collected the required Stage 3 MU objective and CQM data and met the required MU measure thresholds. You should be able to run a report in your CERT to see if you met those required MU thresholds. And if you don't know how to do that, contact your EHR vendor for help. Excuse me. Reports will be different depending on your EHR, but this is a basic example looking at the CPOE objective. Now keep in mind not all reports are created equal, but at a minimum we're looking for the provider's full name, NPI if available, and the MU reporting period. It also lists the 3 separate measures of the objective for this example. This report lists out the measures, the minimum percentage needed to meet the measure, the numerator and denominator for those measures, and the EP's resulting percentage. If your report doesn't tell you what the required measure threshold is, or if you have a question about an objective, you can reference CMS's specification sheets for more information. On the objective spec sheet, look at the section labeled measure. This will tell you the required threshold for that measure. So for example, for the CPOE objective, measure 1, more than 60% of medication orders created by the EP during the EHR reporting period are recorded using CPOE. Then you can go back and look at your report from your EHR, and if it shows more than 60% for that measure, you would meet the measure. So here you can see that the EP ordered 100% of medication orders using CPOE, so they meet this measure. On the flip side, here's an example of where an EP doesn't meet the objective. Using Objective 7 Health Information Exchange as an example, the spec sheet says to meet the measure, an EP must attest to all 3 measures and meet the threshold for at least 2 measures to meet the objective. If the EP meets the exclusion criteria for all 3 measures, they would be excluded from meeting the measure. Excuse me, this EP meets the exclusion criteria for measure 1 because they transferred a patient to another setting or referred a patient to another setting, referred a patient to another provider less than 100 times during their MU reporting period, which is an acceptable reason to exclude this measure. And the EP meets the threshold for measure 2. The spec sheet indicates that an EP needs to meet a threshold of more than 40%, and this report shows the EP has 98.1%, so the EP meets measure 2. The issue is measure 3. To take the exclusion for measure 3, an EP would need less than 100 referrals or encounters. As you see here, the EP had 260 encounters, so they're not eligible to take the exclusion. To meet the measure, the EP needs a measure threshold of more than 80%, and as you see on the report, the EP only has 33.5. So the EP does not meet the measure. Because the EP doesn't meet the required threshold for at least 2 measures and can't take the exclusion, the EP does not meet the objective. If that happens to you, try to find another 90-day period in calendar year 2020 in which you do meet all 8 objectives. If you didn't meet all 8 objectives in a 90-day period in calendar year 2020, you won't be able to attest for program year 2020, but you can try again one more time in program year 2021. As you may remember, participation does not need to be done in consecutive years. To meet MU, as a reminder, 50% or more of your MU encounters must have occurred at a location with CERT. There's a warning message on the measure reporting period page, and you'll also see another message on the measure navigation homepage, letting you know that you'll be denied if you don't correct the issue. You'll also see a warning message in NC MIPS letting you know that you'll be denied if you don't meet the MU measure thresholds. You'll be warned 3 times. The first error message will be on the objectives page. The second error message shows up on the MU objective summary page where the invalid or incomplete objective is highlighted in red. And there's also a pop-up message if you hit the next button. Finally, the measure navigation homepage will show at least one red X in the complete or valid column. Excuse me, allergies apparently. So please pay attention to these warnings and resolve the issue accordingly. Now here are the 8 Stage 3 MU objectives. I'm not going to read through them, but if you want to review the objectives in their entirety and at length, you can always find the Stage 3 MU summary and detailed spec sheets on CMS's website. The CMS spec sheets are our go-to when we have a question about the objective or measures, so you can always refer to those if you have questions. You can find the spec sheets on CMS's website by going to the 2020 Program Requirements hyperlink that can be found on the left side of their page and navigate to the Stage 3 Medicaid EP requirements. Or you can go to our program website and the spec sheets will be provided on the MU tab. I'm not going to read through every objective, like I said, but there are a few things I want to draw your attention to. First, the Stage 3 MU objectives and measure thresholds have stayed the same from program year 2019. And it's not new, but it bears repeating that in July 2019, CMS clarified the requirements for meeting objectives 6 and 7. The language on the spec sheet reads, an EP must attest to all 3 measures and meet the threshold for 2 measures for this objective. If the EP meets the criteria for exclusion from 2 measures, they must meet the threshold for 1 remaining measure. If they meet the criteria for exclusion from all 3 measures, they may be excluded from meeting this objective. The wording was slightly different in program year 2018, so hopefully this clarification adds more flexibility for meeting these objectives. Finally, the only time an EP should claim an exclusion for the NCIR measure, which is Objective 8, Measure 1, is if you have not administered any vaccinations during your MU reporting period. If you have administered vaccinations during your MU reporting period, you may not claim an exclusion, and you must be in active engagement with the North Carolina Immunization Registry, NCIR, to meet Objective 8, Measure 1. You will receive a warning message if you claim an exclusion, but I just wanted to bring your attention to that before you begin preparing for attestation. In addition to the 8 Stage 3 MU objectives, EPs will be reporting on 6 CQMs. To learn about CQMs in program year 2020, please watch the CQM webinar. The links to the websites I referred to and the webinars I referred to in this webinar will be made available in the comments section below. Thanks so much for tuning in today, and please let us know if you have any questions. Our email address is ncmedicaid.hit@dhhs.nc.gov.